Hi, everyone. I'd like to do a shout out to our sponsor, Baco Diagnostics. Early detection is the single most important factor in improving patient outcomes. The Baco Diagnostics team recognizes how impactful a podiatric physician can be and remains committed to supporting you in your role as the first line of defense in diagnosing conditions of the lower extremity. Thanks to the unwavering support of their clients, Baco Diagnostics has been able to give back to the podiatric community for 16 years by providing podiatric educational resources and advocating for the position. Baco Diagnostics, helping podiatric physicians keep America on its feet. If you have not yet had the opportunity to utilize Baco Diagnostics services, get started today by sending an email to corporaterelations@bacodiagnostics.com. The first 50 podiatry offices who request a starter kit will receive a Dean's Chat mug. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dean's Chat, where we discuss all things podiatric medicine. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Jensen. I'm the Dean at the Arizona College of Podiatric Medicine and the host for the Dean's Chat podcast. Once again, I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Joanna Richey. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Jeff. How you doing?
I am doing fabulous. I'm actually in Florida for almost 2 weeks, so I'm doing these podcasts kind of remote. Thanks for being in the studio.
I love coming down to the studio, and it's a gorgeous day here in Phoenix. It's the reason you live here right now. So,
oh, that's fantastic. Hey, we have a super exciting episode today. Our guest is Dr. Douglas Pacaccio from the Chicagoland area. We have a whole list of exciting things to talk about, but would you mind giving him a more formal introduction?
yeah, no, thank you. I'm so excited to have Dr. Pacaccio here with us. I had met him actually as a fourth-year student, and we had done a medical mission trip together, which I know we'll talk a little bit about that, and then have actually bumped into each other a couple times. And so finally I decided, I'm going to try to see if he'll come on and talk about all of the amazing work that he's doing. So Doug, we're going to give you a kind of formal introduction, but then we'll kind of dive into some of your career into more depth, if that's okay. So Dr. Pacaccio graduated from the University of Illinois with a dual degree in biology and philosophy with a focus on ethics. And I'm excited to kind of dive into that a little bit, Doug, if you don't mind. Went on to do his podiatric medical school with Rosalyn Franklin University, and then went to the Inova Fairfax residency program for his 3 years of surgical training. He went on to do a fellowship program with Georgetown University focused in plastics and reconstruction, along with some nerve surgery. And we're excited to have you here on Dean's Chat.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We are a little informal, so is it okay if we go with first names?
That's my God-given name. I'm good with it.
All right, excellent. And is Doug good, or do you want Douglas?
Douglas, only if you're angry at me.
All right, no, we're not angry at all. All right, Doug. So what I would love to start with is, can you tell us a little bit about what got you interested in podiatry?
Well, when I was young, my dad was sort of a blue-collar guy, could fix everything, jack of all trades. We did a lot of work in the garage. He could do plumbing, he could do electric, he could do carpentry. He worked for the phone company as a lineman. And interestingly, my father was one of the only people at the Illinois Bell system, which then became Ameritech and then SBC, and I think now AT&T, that does not have a formal college education, who went into their engineering department because he was so good at how they laid line, and he was one of the guys who, when he was writing it on paper, he could actually see it in his head because he worked on it in real life. He grew up in New Orleans. His father had a heart attack, which was a financial burden on his family, and so he joined the Marine Corps, and he went into the Vietnam War at 17 years old, and he carried a bunch of books around with his gunny sack. And got his GED in country, fighting in the war. So that background was sort of gritty, and he came back, and my dad's like the perfect example when I talk to people about there's a difference between education and intellect. And what I mean by that is education means you've gone through some formal training, which that's how we think about it. But education can be anything, right? It could be going to your neighbors and learning about some skill set that they have that's very informal, but you're still getting that part of the education. My father was not a very educated person, but he was an incredibly intellectual guy, very smart guy, could read a book, could look at something mechanical, could figure it out. And so that background with him, having sort of this mindset of being able to read books and be able to process them, he always told me, go to school, and work for yourself. And so in that vein, when I was at the University of Illinois, I remember my father had he had a rheumatologist because he was diagnosed with Agent Orange, like RA, and his rheumatologist gave him some posters, and he always told my son's going to be a doctor, right? That's just kind of what they told me. And so there was actually a poster of a tibia, fibula, and ankle, like the ones that we have in our offices today, in my room. And so everyone said, well, be a doctor or a lawyer. And that's kind of what you hear growing up in that environment. At U of I like you said, I have a bachelor's of science and biology, and then a separate bachelor's of arts and philosophy. So I was thinking medical school, law school, whatever. And I took both the LSAT and the MCAT, and I scored quite high on the LSAT, to be honest with you. And I remember having a conversation with my mother and saying, I don't think I want to keep going to school. This was back in the middle 90s, late 90s, when everyone was getting the economy was booming, the dot-com was going on, and everybody's getting these great jobs. Just for your young viewers who are probably in residency or students right now, when I was graduating college in 1999, $40,000 a year starting salary at Ernst & Young as a consultant was a massive paycheck. So I thought, well, I could just go do this. And my mom said, no, you've always wanted to do this all your life. Why don't you stick with it? And while I was kind of doing that, trying to figure out which path to go, I was a service partner at the hospital called Covenant in Urbana, Champaign, which was a fancy word for an orderly. And while I was there, there's a guy named Dr. Mike Muscatella. If he watches this, shout out to him. I've told him before, but I don't know if he knows how much he influenced me. He was coming down on the vascular unit and rounding on his vascular patients. And he heard my last name was Italian. He invited me in the operating room. I saw a bunionectomy with him. He was a great surgeon. And I remember when he popped the adductor and kind of shifted the house over, that was very shocking to me. Like, oh my God, what did we just do? So then I went to his office and I shadowed him, and he got to see everything. He got to do bone work. He got to do soft tissue. He got to see athletes. He got to do, trauma. He did all that stuff. And I remember watching the cardiologists and the vascular guys. When I was there on a Sunday morning, they were there. When I was there on a Monday night, they were there. And you start kind of asking yourself, what's the lifestyle? And we always profess in podiatry, right, that you can have a really nice career in medicine, but also have a life outside of it. And that's kind of what I got into. And just seeing that procedure in Muscatella, I started looking into it. I didn't know that podiatry was a different field. I just thought it was a subspecialty in allopathic. So I started looking it up. And of course, remember, $40,000 a year was a lot of money coming out of college. And at the time, I remember like it was yesterday, the average podiatrist was making $106,000 a year, right, in 1999 or something. I was like, well, this is amazing. And I can go to 4 years of school, and I can fast track a 2-3 year residency and kind of get into this. So that's kind of what got me into that realm. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up in Chicago, where I grew up. So I had a lot of friends up there too. So it just kind of all fell together in a lot of different ways. If you ask me the short answer, being a deep believer in God and purpose, it's kind of what podiatry brought me to my wife, my children, my family, my career. It brought me to some of the things that I got to do in medicine that I don't know that I would have done otherwise. So I'm very grateful for that. And I think I don't really know the exact moment I said, oh, this is what I'm going to do. But I looked into all of that stuff, and it just culminated. And Dr. Muscatella had a really important influence, because he said to me, I really like my job. The only thing I don't like is dealing with insurance companies. And I don't know. I have no idea what he's talking about, but
yeah, not much has changed, right?
No, but we all do. So that's where it started. And matriculating in Chicago was great, because it was like coming home. And I knew a lot of people there, which made it a lot of fun.
What are your thoughts, Jeff?
I'm having lots of memories of when I was in school. My wife was an accountant. She worked for Price Waterhouse, and they moved us from San Diego to San Francisco for school, and then to Detroit for residency. So you're right, there are a lot of career options back in the day. But like you, I kind of was pulled into podiatry, and it's the best decision I ever made. I'm very grateful.
And I'd love to circle back to some of the things that you had talked about. First, I love that there was a poster, that there was something visual that you kind of saw and you got really interested, and it sparked that curiosity of, okay, like I'm interested in this. I want to know more about this. And you've done so much in your career, Doug, in terms of which we will get into in more depth in just a second. But I'm just going to start to kind of lay the the breadcrumbs as we go down those conversations in terms of creativity and innovation. As you had started as a younger version of yourself, looking at two very different professions, they were both, thought work professions. Was there something after being in the hospital? Did you do any law shadowing, or did you do anything to experience that field?
Yeah, I did. I mean, we had friends. I mean, I grew up in the North Shore. The reason I got to grow up in Glenville, Illinois, was because my dad could fix anything and build anything, and so we grew up in a neighborhood that was definitely kind of hitting above our weight class, because he could buy an old rundown home and he literally rehabbed the whole thing, and worked really, really hard to keep us, in the mix. I had a car when I was 16, but it was not a brand new car like a lot of my friends had gotten. So I grew up around a lot of affluent people, and many of them were lawyers, many of them were doctors. And it was funny to me how many of the lawyers that I talked to, when I talked to them, just told me flat out, just don't go into law. like just don't do it. Now, they may have been miserable for whatever reason, but you don't have that perspective when you're 17, 18 years old. I did have one of my best friends whose dad is an endodontist. He told me go into dentistry. So I had like these different forces pushing on me with all these professional people. One thing is, like, I got up and I looked up and I saw these people every day that were doing really well in life. And today I think we tend to sometimes, I want that, I'm owed that. And what I learned was you work, these are all very hardworking people, a lot of them self-made. And Dr. Polina in particular was telling me go into dentistry. And he said to me, dentistry hasn't been infiltrated by the insurance companies and this and that. I mean, he gave me all these like really lifestyle and business reasons why dentistry made a lot of sense. And I remember not understanding that as a senior in high school. I fully understand it now. And I just remember thinking like, oh, I don't want to dig in someone's mouth for a living. But now I have one of my best friends from college he's a very accomplished dentist in the St. Louis area. They do a lot of really cool stuff. They do a lot of implants. They do a lot of neat things. So again, it's sort of just your myopic view of what this is. And so I got too many people who said, don't go to law. And a lot of people said, yeah, medicine's great. And I think back then too, and Jeff, I bet you have a great perspective on this in terms of the good old days of medicine, if you were a part of that or you're reaching the tail end of it. But I feel like we're always telling our younger colleagues that the good old days were gone and that we were in the good old days and now they're gone. And so I don't know how that all influenced where I was, Joe, but I did have some people say that. The other thing too is, mechanically speaking, I liked fixing things and I liked doing things with my hands. So as much as I love a good debate or a good philosophical discussion about epistemology or existentialism or whatever you want to talk about, there's something very gratifying about fixing something. My daughter's little pop-up water bottle broke the other day, and everything today is like throwaway. So it's like, oh, we'll just get you new. And I said, let me see that. And so of course I had to go in the garage and grab the needle nose pliers and put it back together and see if it would still function, and gave it back to her. And, it's a silly thing, but there's a deep sense of gratification that you kind of gave something back its purpose, for kind of a weird way of saying it. But that was, I think, one of the things that also kind of pushed me into podiatry, which is when you go into podiatry, if you want to, right, you're going into a surgical subspecialty. You don't have to, but that's on the table, and then you got to do well in school to get the programs you want. But in allopathic medicine, I remember looking at and saying all these years, and then you better score well on your boards if you want to become a surgeon or a this or that or anesthesiologist. And so that was kind of another thing. Just sort of my very pragmatic view of my life, sort of the way I grew up, was get from here to here as fast as I can. And I think that had a lot of influence in how I made my decision.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There are so many things, and especially now, as people have reevaluated what work means to their life and how it integrates into their life, and helping young people figure out, I don't know what I'm passionate about. And I think there's actually a really good argument to do what you love culture is actually wrong, and that there's some good evidence to support that, doing what you love is not good advice. I'll just throw a quick book out there. I have no affiliation or endorsement of this, but the So Good They Can't Ignore You, the work of Cal Newport, really talks about this idea that the people that are most satisfied with their job are not the ones that are doing what they love. They end up loving what they do, but they have skills that are rare and valuable that provide satisfaction and purpose to their life. That's what makes people happy. And I love how you kind of identified things that you saw in your dad, that your dad was doing, that you could recognize that you wanted some of that. And you found opportunities that supported that. And I'd like to take that and transition it, because you're a fellowship director for the Ortho Illinois Fellowship Program for Foot and Ankle Reconstructive Surgery. But you've also been an inventor, and you've got multiple patents, which is in and of itself a large feat. And so I'd love to shift the conversation. We will get to fellowship stuff because that's a hot topic and everyone's really interested in it. But I'd love to pick your brain a little bit about some of the creative opportunities that you've had. When I had in person seen you last, you had been working on a intramedullary nail. And so I'd love to get, again, that was 15 years ago that we had that conversation. But I remember like hearing you talk about it then. It was so exciting to me as a fourth year student to see all of these different opportunities that you could be a part of. So I'd love to get your take on kind of what that has looked like in terms of medical device innovation.
Sure. I'll start with just what you touched on with the book. And I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think that we have a little bit of too much of a utopian view of the world, and we teach that to kids, and then they come out and they think that, what did they tell me? I love folding paper airplanes, and if I love it, I should be able to make a living at it. And that's kind of a wrong thing to say, right? Which I think you have to put the caveats, you have to put the bookends on it. Yes. And for me, it was there's a movie and a book called Happy, Happy. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. But when you want to sit down one day and just kind of realize how that works. I used to talk about it in some of my lectures to the younger students and residents. It was a University of Illinois sociology professor said one day, well, we have all these metrics and criteria and check boxes for depression. How do we quantify happiness? And he was told by his guys, well, you can't do that. How are you going to quantify happiness? And so he started, and this was in the 90s when I was there, that this research was happening. And this documentary kind of takes you through the body of the work, and then it shows you like what does it really entail to make someone happy. And one of the main things they came up with was, once money and material wealth will help your happiness appreciably from, at the time, and I'm using like late 90s numbers, from like $0 to like $55,000 a year, right? So if you made 10, 20, 30, 40, like every time you want to rung up on that ladder, you were going to be substantially happier. But what they found was that once you met a certain threshold, like 55, 60,000 a year, again, these are earlier numbers, they probably would need to be adjusted for today. Making 55,000 to 500,000 didn't really move the needle very much. And then there's like, now you have $1 trillion and you do whatever you want. I think that's, if someone's shooting for that, be prepared for disappointment, because I don't think Bill Gates, and I don't think Jeff Bezos, and I don't think in particularly Steve Jobs woke up one day and said, I want to be a billionaire, right? Elon Musk. I think all those guys probably had a passion for something that ended up creating a market, something that the world wanted that it didn't even know existed at the time. And so you can't really think about like, I want to be a billionaire. You got to think about, what do I want to do to be happy? And the other thing is, what they found was that there's a hierarchy, which is once you have community, you have a sense of purpose in life, right? And you feel like you're helping others. That all comes after food in your belly, roof over your head, clothes on your back. And so too many people go down this rabbit hole of, if I just get a bigger boat, or if I just get a bigger house, or if I just get a faster car. And I can tell you that doesn't move the needle that much, because you get kind of caught in this vicious cycle. you really want to do something in life, whether you love it at first or not, get a good skill set. Get a skill set that people need. Be really good at it. Because I always say you can do something you love, or you can start to love something you do by being really, really good at it. So I tell my fellows, I tell my residents, when you become really good at this, you're no longer thinking about the nuances of how to do the surgery. You're just enjoying the process of the surgery. You can now look past the technical skill of it. I tell my patients, and I tell them not to take this the wrong way, I'm kind of bored with surgery in a sense that I say a pilot should know how to take off and land an airplane. I don't get on my flight at American Airlines and knock on the door and say, hey, do you know how to fly this thing? I make the assumption that we're going to land safe. And by and large, thank God, we mostly do. But I think if you can get to a point where you're really proficient and really good at what you do, then the struggles of it slide away, and then you can really focus on the meaning of it. And that's when it really takes on another life, and it elevates to another level. It's kind of like reading. If you've ever watched someone who's not very good at reading, they're struggling with the words, they're not comprehending what the sentences are saying. Once you become good at reading the words and it flows, now you're no longer thinking about what these three letters together, what the sounds make and what the word is. You're thinking about the meaning of it. And I think that's kind of how the advice I try to give my fellows and residents, to just get really good at it, is the best you can be, right? And that's all you can ask of somebody. And if you do that, then you're probably going to love what you do, and you're going to find that purpose, and you're going to find community, and that should be enough to make you happy. But that being said, as far as everything else goes, I don't know. I mean, it's just something that's really a simple message. I think
we're going to have you on for like a separate podcast that's just like Deep Thoughts with Doug, because I would love to go into this conversation with you, because there are so many nuances to the things that you've said, that, oh man, we could literally talk for hours about this topic.
Well, and you're like that. I mean, Joe, I remember you as a student, and I've seen some of your guys' recent podcasts, and I've seen, the people that you've interviewed who knew you as a student. And I mean, it's not a surprise to me that you're sitting here on this show being one of the main drivers of this, because of just the energy and the enthusiasm that you always brought to every day when we were in Africa, whether it was, the flight there, the long flight back, the long hours in the OR, dealing with whatever it was we were dealing with. Like, it's just, you can tell that some people are going to be successful by their demeanor, by the fact that you don't want it given to you. You want the opportunity to go get it. And that's how you've always been. So I think you'd probably be able to have that conversation and share a lot of that. You're a little younger than me, but you have wisdom beyond your years.
Well, thank you. That's a very big compliment. I'm gonna redirect us though to the innovator.
Oh,
and innovator, because I loved the conversation. And again, I want to latch on and like go down that rabbit hole, but we'll have to save it. I'm serious. We'll just call it like Deep Thoughts with Doug.
Deep Thoughts. Philosophy 1010.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the innovation part?
Yeah. Like, what was that? How did that start for you? What was it that made you think, you know what, I think I could design a better device, or there's a gap and I want to fix it? And again, I can see so many things from what you told me about, or told us about, the history with your dad and how he would fix things and tinker. And like, so that's where my brain kind of goes, but I'd love to see, how did that start for you? How did you get involved with device innovation?
So the way that this started, one, my mind was always kind of this way, which was, I learned early on as a kid, I'd get G.I. Joe toys, and I was in such a hurry, I would try to put them together without looking at the directions, right? And then you'd realize that you have a lot of extra parts left over, and the thing doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And then you're going back and you're trying to fix everything. And there's the old saying, there's nothing that saves time like doing it right the first time. And so I learned that if I wanted to actually play with this toy, I should just open the book and follow the directions one at a time and listen. And then I kind of realized that was the way to kind of get there the quickest and have the best value out of your time. The other thing was, my parents used to make me rake leaves in the backyard, and I would spend all day avoiding it. I'd make a pile, I'd jump in it, and somewhere, I don't remember how old I was, I learned, it's just better to do the work and get it done, because my father also had a saying, which is, there's a lot of people in this world who spend more time getting out of work than if they just did the work themselves, or just did the work itself. And so that was another influence in kind of how I look at things. When I was in school, one of my fraternity brothers from U of I, he's now the department head of mechanical engineering at Duke University. His name's Professor Ken Gall, and him and I have been friends since college. And he was at the time just finishing up his postdoc at Sandia and Alamos. And he was down at the University of Colorado Boulder as an assistant professor. And he called me up and he told me, hey, I have this NIH grant that we're working on, and it uses nickel titanium to improve vascular stenting for cardiovascular. And it's really big in central cardiovascular. We're thinking about trying to be able to deliver this and deploy these instruments in peripheral arteries. And I said, well, send me the proposal. I'm happy to read it. But at the time, I was a first year at Scholl, and I was like, well, I'm just trying to memorize anatomy at this point, but I'll read it. And so I read this proposal, and I said to him, well, this is a pretty interesting metal. I know your doctoral thesis was on nickel titanium. Will you send me your doctoral thesis? And so he sent me his doctoral thesis, which I read. And it basically is, I don't know how familiar you guys are with nickel titanium, but it's called a shape memory alloy, and it has certain what we call modulus of elasticity. So it behaves in certain ways. All solids have this Young's modulus of elasticity. And the best way I explain it to people is, it's kind of, if you take a straw and you bend the straw, if you bend it just a little, you'll actually create some strain on it, and it will, but if you release it, it will go back. And if you bend it too much, you'll plastically deform it, and it'll kink, and then it won't go back to its normal shape. And then if you keep going, you can rip it in half, right? Every solid has this type of property, and they have crystalloid structures in them, and they're called austenite and martensite properties. And I remember reading Ken's thesis and saying, well, this is kind of an interesting metal. And in my mind, it was like, well, it kind of acts like a rubber band, maybe, right? Like a metal that acts like a rubber band. And I put the book in my shelf, and I forgot about it for probably a whole nother year. And then when we were kind of starting to hit up rotations, the big thing was AO, right? We all know that. And if you guys, I mean, I don't know how you guys were doing it at the Arizona school, Jeff, it'd be interesting to know, but AO tends to be a lot of like oral history for us. You get lectured about AO and what are the principles of internal fixation, atraumatic dissection, anatomic reduction, rigid internal fixation, which is now stable biologic, largely because of a lot of the work we've been doing, and early range of motion. And so this is kind of beat into you. And I said, again, Joe, kind of back to the point about doing the work. I was like, well, I want to understand this fully. So I checked the book out, and it was a 1996, 1997 Allgauer Mueller AO fixation manual. And it took me 6 months. No one was checking it out. I think I was like the second person ever to check it out. And so I just kept renewing it. It took me about 6 months to work through it. There was a chapter in there in particular that talked about lag screw fixation, and how when they would lag screw a femur of a goat or an ovine model animal study, they would put little pressure plates, and they found out that after 2 weeks of this fixation, they lost 42 to 50% of the compressive load. And you ask yourself, well, why is that, right? If I screw two 2x4s together, these inert materials, how do you lose this load? And then you realize that there's a biological process happening in there as well. And then the light bulb went off in my head and said, wait a minute, what about Ken's special super material? Can I make something that can behave like a rubber band and create a load that we could put across this system? And then as the bone resorbs, which then reduces the compressive load that you've established in your static system, can it recover that strain and maintain the load? And so I called up Ken and I said, hey, I have this idea. I flew out to Colorado. I got to do a 1 month long externship at the University of Colorado Boulder with Ken. I was I had to write a thing, like a request, and send it to the people in school and say, I want to go out and do this research externship. And we did a lot of skiing. I'm not gonna lie, but we also did a lot of working. And we were sitting at this Mexican restaurant in Denver. No, I'm sorry, that was in Boulder at the time. That would only serve you one margarita because you were a mile high. And so we were sitting there, and I kind of drove on on a napkin, this is kind of my idea, Ken. Do you think we can make it? And Joe, what you were learning about when you were with me was the I am now, but that wasn't the first ideation. The first ideation is now, if you go up on like the Innova's website and you look at the helix screw, that was sort of the first ideation, was kind of putting this lag screw across and having it stretch like a rubber band, and then having it maintain a compressive load. And as we kind of went down that rabbit hole, we did a lot of trial and error. We actually wrote an SBIR grant to the National Institute of Health, and it was really funny because they sent back a review of our proposal and said, this is a really great application for orthopedics, but it can't be done. And we actually had a working prototype at the time. So what it was kind of, I think, my concept of matching the mechanics with the biology, teaching that to Ken. Ken's genius with the material and learning how to overcome a lot of the mechanical hurdles that were present at the time with nickel titanium. Because if you remember, at the time, you had these staples called OS staples, and they were what we call shape memory. So they're very temperature dependent, and you would have to hit it with a little pen to heat it up to have it compress. We wanted to use the pseudo-elastic properties and actually mechanically stretch the material, and it was a much more reliable way of doing it. And we were told it couldn't be done, but as everybody knows, it can be done. And so that's kind of where that all started. And then it just took me on the adventure of a lifetime that I never planned on being doing a series, a friends and family round for seed money for a startup, and then a Series A, and then sitting on the board of a startup company for over 10 years. And all the stuff that went along with that, and flying all over God's green earth, looking at trying to cajole venture capital money and all this other stuff. And I was going through residency at the time, and if you guys haven't interviewed Richard Derner yet, you really need to, because he was one of my mentors, and he taught me a lot. He was very hard on you, and I always gravitated to those guys who were hard on us. Everyone else was like, "Oh, that guy's tough, he's mean," I was like, well, I want to go see what this is about, right? Because usually you get the most out of those guys. And I'm happy when my fellows say it was a really hard year, but it was worth it, right? That's all you want to hear as a mentor, as an instructor. But all through residency, I'm working on this, top secret invention device or whatever, and so not only was I balancing residency, we were also running a startup and taking that and trying to get that off the ground, which that's a whole nother discussion about the ups and downs of what that looks like. But it was something that I never in a million years could imagine it would take the life that it took, and actually be what I consider to be a platform in orthopedics that has completely changed the face of orthopedics.
Yeah.
And so my mom picked me up at the airport, at O'Hare Airport, when I got back from that rotation. I said to my mom in the backseat, I said, I think I just came up with my $1 million idea. And she went, oh yeah, that's nice, honey. And we just kind of, let's go get some dinner. So there's some levity in there as well.
That's fantastic. Jeff, what are your thoughts? I know you have a lot of experience yourself with patents and venture capitalism and raising funds. So,
well, the first thing that came to my mind, Doug, was ideas are fragile when you first come up with them. And all you need is somebody like a mentor, somebody to knock it down, to kind of break it up a little bit. And it's true for SBIR grants, because I used to get SBIRs, and the group that was reviewing it would come back and say, yeah, you can't do this for X, Y, and Z. And I used to have to write these really nice letters that said, thank you so much for your insightful guidance. We are doing this, this, and this. So it's a process. And I mean, again, we can talk more about this down the road, Doug. I mean, I did this thing. I raised the money, got the family money, got investment groups, and then all of a sudden, it's not just your baby, it's everybody's baby, and you can't keep anybody happy. I remember all those days.
Right.
Congratulations to you. I think in the interest of time, Joe, we should talk about the fellowship and things, because if we can talk Doug into coming back, there's a lot of things we can talk about beyond, I love that conversations with Doug. What was your term?
Deep thoughts with Doug.
Deep thoughts with Doug. There you go. I like that.
Sounds a lot like a Saturday Night Live skit.
Well, we would start it with Maslow's hierarchy and things of
there you go. Yeah,
self-actualization and all that.
Yeah.
I love it. But anyways, congratulations. I mean, that whole thought process and all of that takes a lot of fortitude. And to be honest with you, doing it while you were a resident, you didn't have all the credibility necessarily yet. My hat's off to you.
Well, I would say this, and then obviously we can move on. And the message that I have that I like to have is there were kind of two camps in school, and one was, oh, you're just a podiatrist, just do that, just stay in the box. And what I really like, I always think that, I'll use the pizza analogy. I'm from Chicago. You can always bake a bigger pizza, right? There's so much room for growth. There's so much room for good ideas. We all meet people who've never met a good idea that wasn't their own. And that's kind of a silly way to approach things, because collaboration, I mean, what my first ideation of this concept would be, there's a lot of engineers, there's a lot of people who put a lot of valuable insight into, like you were saying, Jeff. You have to be willing to look at your baby and have someone tell you it's ugly sometimes, and not be married to your own vision of what it should be. But what I want to tell anybody who's listening, any students, any residents, anybody, is that this profession will take you as far as you want it to take you. If you want to put the effort in, and I think that's true just about anything in life. If you put in the hard work, you may not get always the exact result you're looking for, but you'll get a much better result than if you don't put the hard work in. So that's one of the things I love to take away, that this profession's great, and anybody can do this. They just have to decide that that's something they want to do.
And the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Interesting how that works, right, Jeff?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, before we transition into fellowships, Jeff, could we do a quick shout out to our sponsor?
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. Let's have a little shout out to Bacco Diagnostics. We all know that early detection is the most important determination in improving patient outcomes. Bacco Diagnostics remains committed to supporting you in your role as the first line of defense in diagnosing lower extremity pathologies. Bacco Diagnostics, helping podiatric physicians keep America on its feet. Doug, I'm sure you've been exposed to Bacco. I mean, they're so good to us at the school level, the residency level, the practice level. We're super psyched to have Bacco as a sponsor for Dean's Chat.
Sure, certainly. I will tell anybody who will listen, and this is a great platform. Thank you for letting me have it for my little piece. When you have a choice to use services or equipment or implants, obviously, number one is patient care, right? Patients come first. But if I have two companies that have the same product and it's equally effective and it's equally as good, you always look to the companies that are supporting our profession and supporting education in general, right? And that's not a hard one for me. That's another thing that I try to kind of mentor my students, residents, and fellows into is, you have choices, and if you choose the people that are furthering your education, it's giving us a foundation to continue to grow, and that's something that you should never forget. So I agree with you, Jeff. You have to pay attention to who's helping out, who's becoming a partner in our quest to do what we do.
Well said.
And that's actually a beautiful segue. You have been involved in certainly community efforts. You were awarded by your community for some of the community service efforts that you've done for different medical organizations, including Heart and Haiti, Physicians for Peace, and then also Limb Rescue International. But on top of your community service, you've also been actively involved with the residency program with OSF St. Anthony Medical Center. And then and for a while now, since 2016, the fellowship director for the Northwest Illinois Foot and Ankle Surgical Fellowship. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in education and what it's been like to go from teaching residents and then now the different kind of experience that fellowship is?
Sure. First, I want to say I'm co-director with Dr. Patrick McEnany, so it's definitely a combined effort. We have enough volume, we have enough pathology. We could easily probably train 2-3 fellows a year. It's just funding is one of the main bottlenecks for our types of fellowships. But I do appreciate our entire fellowship committee. They know who they are. And so hats off to them. We wouldn't have the program we have without all their dedication and hard work as well. But to your question, Joe, what's the difference? I think the difference is Fellowship is something that someone does not have to do. And I find different motivations for why they do that. Uh, and one of the things I tell every candidate who will apply for our program and who we might consider as our fellow is I give them a personal phone call and I tell them, you are going to work harder than you've ever worked in your life, and I'm telling you right now, and I don't want you to tell me I didn't tell you later. And almost in a way like scaring them off, right? Anybody who does surgery, in my opinion, well, I'll tell you a story. My rep for total ankles back in the day, when we weren't so sure about what we could do with them, I trained on the agility, and I didn't do a single one outside of residency because I remember watching good surgeons do good surgery on good patients, and we had way more complications than what I was reading about in the literature. And I just thought, it maybe, you know, I have a little bit of a mechanical thing about me, and I was like, this thing is just not a good design. And so when I did finally do my first one on a second generation total ankle that was through the FDA, I told the patient, I said, this is my first one. And I know how to do total ankles. I've done total ankles before, but you'll be my first one outside of residency with this implant. And the reason I wouldn't offer you the other implant is because I don't believe in it. And that patient agreed. And I remember going through the list of like, here's all the things that can go wrong, right? And here's all the things we don't know. And to this day, when I soft launch a new product, I'll tell the patient, I love data, I love evidence-based medicine, but you can't always use it. There's just not enough of it. So anecdote plays a role in it. And you got to balance that with your patients. And I'll tell them, if there's statistics, I'll tell someone, you know, plantar fasciitis, 95% of the time I'll get this better without surgery. Right. And then if you need it released, 97% of those get better. I can tell those patients that we have the data on that. When I have a new device, I tell them, I don't have 20-year follow-up. I don't have 5-year follow-up, but here's why we like it. Here's why we do it. You really have to inform those patients. And so when I told this patient sort of my experience with total ankle and what we were going to do, the rep said, geez, you act like, sounds like you're trying to scare this person away from the surgery. And I said, well, I'm not trying to scare them away, but I want to make sure that they really want this. And that's one of the things I think is really important as a surgeon is you have to tell your patients the reality of what they're up against and the reality of reasonable expectations for success, for complications, for sidebars. And I have this philosophy that if someone comes in and they don't really need the surgery after I give them my consent, which lists all these horrible things that can go wrong, it sounds like the end of a drug commercial, then they don't really need it. And that's kind of one of the things I teach my residents and fellows, that this is something that if you do it this way, you're going to weed out the people who are here because they don't like the way their bunion looks instead of it's really hurting them and affecting their quality of life. So from that end, you know, the fellows don't have to be there. My current fellow right now, he was in practice for 2 years, making good money. And he got a lot of trauma training down in Florida. My practice is largely reconstruction now. I did trauma in the early days. That you think you want to do that when you're a student, when you're a resident, and then the reality of what it really is kind of sets in. And then if you can get away from that and you can kind of get into a recon situation where you get to do things on your time, the patients come to you, they choose you, then I think you kind of, it's just a different animal. And so he left a perfectly good job to come and get more training. And I think that's real admirable. And that just says a lot about a person. But I do tell them all, you're going to work your brains out. And they don't have to be there. And I do say to them, if I'm ever too hard on you, there's the door. You don't have to be here. I'm not keeping you here. You're not a prisoner. If I don't have any value to add to your education, then that's okay. You can walk away. I think residents kind of feel like they have to get through to the end. I mean, you're still in that mindset where you have these boxes to check to get to your license. And as we all know, I mean, some of them are excellent, some of them are mediocre, and some of them you wonder why they're even there. And I see that with the residents. We're lucky now in our program that the program in Chicago has gotten really quite good. So we do tend to attract high quality candidates. But you know, with that being said, sorry, my phone just rang. The biggest difference with the fellows is that they choose to be there and they choose to put themselves through a grueling year, because we do work our fellows really hard, but they all come back and say, I've never worked so hard in my life, but I've also never learned so much in that short of a period of time. And that's what we're after. And I think when you get to do that with people, that's incredibly gratifying, because I can fix as many ankle fractures as these two hands can fix in space and time. But if I can train 10 people to go out and do it well, think of all the people you can touch without ever having to be in the same room with them.
Absolutely. And, before we got on, you had touched a little bit about this idea of repetition. And so the other thing that I appreciate about fellowship is most of them are a year, very few are maybe 2, but to your point, you're going to work harder in that 1 year than you probably, or, maybe depending on where you went for your residency, than you did in your entire 3 years of residency. But to get that opportunity to, condense that learning process and the repetition part,
Right.
what have you seen in terms of like the biggest strides, or you start with a new fellow, and these people, they're proficient, they're able, to your point, they're able to be out functioning on their own. What do you see as a mentor and as a leader is like the biggest like jump that they make, and either the whole year or maybe in that first couple months?
It depends on the fellow, to be honest with you. And I have them kind of come in at different levels. And one of the things we learned early on is you may be being told by the residency director that this gal has great hands, they're a real hard worker. You learn sometimes not to always trust that. Right. And Joe, like I post stuff on LinkedIn. I'm not a social media person. I'm not techie at all. As a matter of fact, my neighbor gave me this special microphone. I can't get it to work. It sounds like you're doing okay. And he has a podcast. Ray Binkowski, look him up. He's a business guy. He does a business podcast. It's really good. I did a one with him called The Business of Medicine. But that being said, you kind of got them all at this different starting point. And so by posting, I said, well, I'm going to start showing people like what we're doing in the fellowship and maybe attract, because you got all the big name fellowships, you got OFA, you got some of the other big fellowships. And I said, we're doing all that stuff. We just need people to find out about it. And so LinkedIn's been really good for that. It feels weird to me to kind of be putting stuff online, and it really depends on what fellow I have and how techie they are. That's where you'll see like sort of I surge and post and I fall off. But I think to answer your question, if I can take anybody at where they're at and make them 50% better and also give them the tools to continue to grow and get better afterwards, then I feel like I've done my job. And the biggest thing that I see is sometimes I have patients. Sometimes I have fellows that really, we tell people we are a reconstructive fellowship. We want people who want to do advanced Lizaroff, revision ankles, this kind of stuff. And every once in a while I'll get someone who, they're not very comfortable doing a bunion. And I tell them, well, let's get you there first, because I think not everybody has to do recon. As a matter of fact, doing a good bunion and being good at that is the mainstay of our profession. If someone can do that, if someone can give patients happy outcomes with bunionectomies, bunion treatment, plantar fasciitis, sports medicine, the philosophy of how to treat patients, they're going to have a successful career. So I don't really judge myself so much on how big of surgeries they can do. I have some fellows, I tell them, listen, I don't think you should do total ankles when you get out, because it's a precision surgery. You can do a Lizaroff, you can do Charcot. It's a different animal. I think you can be strong-headed and you can kind of bust. You can do good for Charcot patients without having the best skill set. You just have to be willing to pay attention and do the hard work. There's some surgeries that are, as Dr. Derner would say, sometimes we're carpenters and sometimes we're watchmakers. Not everybody's a watchmaker, and not everybody's a fine finish carpenter, right? You have rough carpenters and finish carpenters. So we try to figure out which avenue each fellow is going to flourish in. And then we really start to focus our training on there, because we really want to give them the tools to succeed in life. And it doesn't mean if you're not doing total ankles, if you're not doing Charcot, if you're not doing any of this stuff, that doesn't mean anything to me. What means to me, and I tell my fellows residents, doctor is the Latin word for teacher. And so we are teachers, and our job is to teach and educate our patients on what's going on with them and what their best options are. Sometimes doing nothing is the best option. I have patients who come into me who are told they need their leg amputated, and a lot of them, we help. But there are some where I tell them, I don't think I have anything better for you. Sometimes it is the answer. And that's kind of the philosophy of it, which is be a good doctor first. Don't worry about being a surgeon. Don't worry about that. First, establish that you're a good teacher. And then if you're a good teacher, you also value learning, and so you'll constantly want to learn. And to answer your question, it's so all over the board. And you probably see this, Jeff, with students. Joe, I'm sure you see it with students and residents. You really got to gauge that individual where they're at, and then say where can I really take them realistically. And it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I don't have a one word answer like, oh, it's the moment I see someone do a total ankle on their own, right? Or the moment I see someone do, I felt they say, look, do peripheral nerve. You're wonderful at it, and people care, and you can help a lot of people doing that. So that's the fun of it, and that's the part that really gratifies me, is when someone kind of realizes this is the avenue, this is what I was put here to do, and then they embrace it and they go for it. And a lot of them don't know when they come in.
Yeah. Oh, I like so many things that you had said there, but
Like
yeah.
that too. Doug, I have a question for you. And this is kind of a broad stroke, but Joe and I have students every day coming in our office. We start mentoring them in clerkship choices, residency opportunities, and fellowship opportunities. You mentioned compressing the experience and the number of patient opportunities and surgical opportunities. Can you kind of give us an idea of an end product in general? I know they're all different, but I always tell students that if you do a fellowship, it could vault your career in terms of experience 3 to 5 years, depending upon where you're doing it and how much you're doing. I hate to just quantify everything, but is there an ability to quantify it?
To quantify the fast forwarding through the career.
Yeah, like with the experience, the opportunity you get in a fellowship will put your clinical career X amount of time forward. But it could be infinite, because without it, they would never have gotten any of those.
Right. I think you can. I'll use speaking of Detroit, my fellow last year, he went out to Detroit, and he's now like the man there. Like, he is just killing it. And it just makes me so proud to see someone who I had that conversation with him. You're going to work as hard as you've ever worked in your life. And he said, I'm not afraid to do it. And he wasn't, and he did. And I'm just watching him enjoy the fruits of his labor. The fact that now he can do these things that he trained at a good program, but he told me, he said, just being in clinic with you and seeing how you work these cases up. It's one thing to do the surgery, right? But knowing when to do the surgery and when not to do the surgery is a skill in and of itself. Just like making an incision, just like sewing a wound closed. And he kind of said that what he felt was like he would have had to take 5 years of practice to get to the comfort level he was at. And he said, when you told me that you do this big surgery and you do a lot of it, I was like, yeah, right, sure, that's what everybody says. But he came here and he did, and it really catapulted him. Now we do high volume, we do good stuff. Not everybody absorbs it, right? Some people just want the piece of paper, and that's one of the things I get to speak to fellows through some of my consulting agreements, and I'm asked to kind of give, like, why do a fellowship? And one of my first slides is, if you just want the piece of paper, don't apply. Right. And you can't always figure out who's what. Some people are really good at interviewing, and then when they get comfortable, they coast. But really, for yourself, you're only cheating yourself, right? If you're given this opportunity and you don't take advantage of it, and you don't try to absorb as much as you can in the year that you're given, then you're not doing yourself a service. So if you want a piece of paper because you want to hang it on the wall, maybe get a little bump in your starting salary, what ends up happening is those people, after a year or two, they fizzle out. The people that they're working with in real life realize that they're not what they say they are. And so I just always tell guys, don't do it for the piece of paper. The piece of paper is a signatory of your education, but do it for the education. And he told me, and I mean, to quantify it, he said 5 years. And I'll take that, because I don't know where he was at. And Jeff, I'd be honest, if you ask your students in residency, you should probably poll them and say, what did this do? That would be an interesting study, to just start polling ex-fellows and say, did your fellowship catapult you? How many years of experience do you think you got out of that? I think that's a really great idea for some sort of a social data.
Yeah, because there's so many reasons why someone might do a fellowship or might not do a fellowship. Those that dive in head first, like those that are applying to your position and saying, hey, next 12 months, I'm in, man, anything I can do. That's a different animal too. So there's a lot of variables going on.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's true. It's not ours is not for everybody. I tell people, if you want to do a lot of bunions, you maybe find there's other programs that do a much better job of that. If you want to do MIS, there's other programs that do a better job of that. No judgment, right? Where do you want to be? Where do you want to fit in the machine? And what do you want to do? And so I think that's a very fair point, which is ours is for people who want to really dig down for a year and do a lot of work. And I don't know, Joe, Jeff, when you guys were in residency, let me ask you guys, did you wake up every day going, oh my God, I only have 3 years to learn everything I can on someone else's dime, right? Or on someone else's, responsibility. And that was in my head every day of residency. I never wanted to be on the floor and be asked a question that I should know the answer to and not know the answer, just paranoia and just try to get, and that's kind of how our program runs, because a lot of our attendings are made up like that. So you never have enough time to do everything you want to do. And so if you come into it with that attitude, you can absorb as much as you can, and everybody gets different things out of different stuff. So I totally agree. It depends on what you want to do for what type of fellowship you would pick. What do you guys hear in terms of like, what are the top 5 reasons that people do fellowship? I'm curious.
Go ahead, Joel. You take it. I'll add to it.
We've definitely heard people want that kind of extra subspecialization, that niche. For example, if they really wanted to do total ankle implants and revision hindfoot work, something like your program would be more like, I'm looking for this experience. And this is where I think it can be hard sometimes when people are looking for some of those niche opportunities to your point, to figure out where do I find that? Because it isn't very easy to just find this information. And so when you talked about being on LinkedIn, somewhat compulsory to just let people know, hey, this is what we are doing. That is the way that the world is now communicating with one another. So I can resonate with that very much, because I'm also not much of a social media person. But now apparently I'm quite the social media person, which is exciting and interesting. The other one is they want that mentor relationship. They want to be an apprentice to something, that craftsman. I want to learn from someone and develop this kind of relationship, which is different than residency, where you have so many different attendings and you're learning, 17 different doctors' way of doing a bunion. This is different in that they want a different kind of experience and relationship. Those are probably the 2 biggest ones. Every once in a while, it's comfort. I don't feel as comfortable as I wanted to be with my skill set. And it doesn't mean they didn't have a great program or they didn't get excellent training. Their just personal level of comfort isn't quite where they want it to be. So the confidence building of, okay, I got this training, could go do this on my own, but I still want to be able to bounce ideas off someone or have an experience where
At the comfort level, because time and time again, we hear residents graduate and say, I know how to do the surgery, but I don't know how to do the rest of it. Like your conversation about the informed consent before, if residents haven't seen the buildup to a reconstructive surgery and what it takes and the confidence that the patient has to have in you as their surgeon to want it, a lot of them don't see that. And then that they do treasure that opportunity, as Joe mentioned, with a mentor and some the guidance provided. So that's true. And that's another way of saying they're just looking for more training, right? I mean, I get that too in some instances. It's all over the board.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
There's some reasons like where, obviously there's some job opportunities that you'll get with a fellowship certificate that you may not without. And we could probably have an entire conversation about whether that's legit or not, right? But that's the reality. The academic world looks at diplomas and it values paper. So that's what I tell people when the credentialing side of things. You got to be fellowship trained to have this credential or that credential. I think it's silly. Show me case logs, right? Show me case logs. Show me a good letter of recommendation. Show me a good ethical personality, someone who's a hard worker, and they're going to get it done. And those are the people that are going to stay in their lane, and they're going to realize just because I was trained to do this doesn't mean I have to do it all the time. And it's okay. My patients who need something I don't give them, it's so easy for me to say, this is what you need, but I don't do it. Go see this guy. And I'll tell you, they love you better than they love the guy who fixes them. And it's because the humanity of what you're doing is you're really caring about them as a person. You're really caring about their well-being. It's an altruistic thing to send business away. But the other side of that coin, when you look at it as a resident or a fellow, is who wants to do a surgery that they're not familiar with, that they're not good at, and then have a complication. Complications are headache enough when you're the expert at it and you did everything right and the patient did everything right and it goes sideways. I always tell my patients, why do you want to put yourself in that situation? It's kind of like, strapping raw steak to your body and jumping in the lion's pit and then wondering, if you're going to be able to run fast enough. It's just a silly thing to do. Do what you're good at, be good at what you do, give people what they came for, and you'll have a successful career.
And you have to admire the personality that says, I can technically know this. I know this. I'm smart. I've done it, but I need the rest of the picture, which really, if you think about it, it mimics what we're experiencing with residency directors. Doug, I get called. I mean, the last couple of months have been wild, right? Residency directors calling about our students, and they're not asking about who the smartest is. They're asking about who works the hardest, who gets along, who takes constructive criticism. Who can calm a tense situation. That's really what they're looking for. Excuse me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important.
And that's kind of a recipe for anything in life. You can talk about residency, you can talk about fellowship, you can talk if you walk into a room and you're already the smartest person in the room, or you already know everything and you have nothing to learn, my God, are you missing a lot? And the quest for not right wisdom is sort of the juxtaposition of knowledge and experience, and you can't get experience without serving the time. So you can have all the knowledge in the world, you can read all the books in the world, but we all know, if we've been around for a while, that what you read about in that book isn't what always happens. And even with our literature, where you look at our literature, and I say this one all the time too, which I'll get out there just for fun. When I was in training, the agility was on the market, and you had people lecturing, I'm having 95% good results with this implant. It's just a steep learning curve. You just have to keep narrowing down the candidate. And I always tell people who will listen at a party of it, well, the moment a better solution came out, those guys who were having 95% good results abandoned that thing overnight. So what it tells you is, always be open-minded to something being better or not being as good as it's advertised. And if I read a paper and it mimics sort of what I'm seeing in my clinic, then I count that as a good juxtaposition of literature and what's actually happening on the ground. I've read papers, tried things, and I'm like, I'm not at all able to produce these same results. And maybe it's me. You have to keep that in mind too. But you start to, as you get longer in the tooth in this career, Jeff, and I don't want to date you either, but maybe you'll agree, you get better at kind of deciphering when it's you or when the paper maybe just has too much bias in it, or there's some sort of other message in there and it's maybe not necessarily reporting what's actually happening. And so just being open-minded that way. And I need a resident, a fellow who wants to work hard and wants to discover that stuff on their own, and not just be teachable. But when they don't know the answer to something, I want the person who knows where to look to find the answer, not be spoon-fed it all the time. Because when you do that, when you put the effort in to find it yourself, you retain it. I make my fellows, I make my residents dictate op reports. I go through them. And I had an NIH pediatric orthopedist who told me when I started residency, because I would help him close the back, his scoliosis patients, and I said, can I come in on one of your clubfoot surgeries? And he said, no problem. And I just went out of my way. It wasn't a rotation. And I went in on his first clubfoot surgery on a 6-month-old clubfoot patient. And he looked at me and he said, Doug, if I ever see you doing this out of residency, I'll cut your thumbs off. And I said, okay. And he said, you're never going to touch the patient, but you can see this. And we did a bunch of cases. And he said, I want you to dictate this op report. And this is where I got the idea. He said, I can go back and read that, and I can know if you know what you're talking about. I can know if you're seeing what I'm seeing in that operating room. And so I did that. And one day he handed me the knife. And I looked at him like, what is this for? Like you told me never, ever, never, don't even think about it, don't even look at it, don't even dream about it. And then he let me do like his next 15. Oh. And it's funny because he came up to me when we were graduating, he said, Pacaccio, if you're not doing this when you get out of here, I'm going to find you and cut your thumbs off. The only time I do it now, and we really don't do it anymore. Right?
You still have thumbs?
Yeah, I have both thumbs. I was in that period where like then Ponseti comes out, right? And so my wife, who's a year behind me, she's training with the same guy, and she's like, we're not doing any surgery anymore. We're doing this new casting technique. And it was like, wow, that's a really, when you think about it, that's a massive upgrade in our medical knowledge, being a doctor, not a surgeon, learning how to make these patients better without cutting on them. Now, when we go overseas and you don't have the longevity, and Joe, you know this from being with all the polio we treated in Africa, sometimes you do these things because it is the best option for the patient at the time, and you are the best person to do it. But even when I got out in Chicago, when I would get a clubfoot patient, I would send them to Shriners. They were doing it all the time, every day. Right. And it's like, I know how to do this surgery. It's really not a hard surgery. It's a scary surgery because you're operating on this tiny little thing. But I knew enough to know this is better served with the guys who are doing, 15 a day or whatever. But it's just kind of a funny story, which illustrates the point, which was if you put hard work in, you can change people's minds without even asking them. And if I read an op report or I read a note from one of my fellows, residents, or students, I can tell you if they know what they're talking about. And that's really important for me that they want to get that vernacular correct, because it means that they've mastered the material.
Yeah.
So many phenomenal things in this episode, Doug. I just love it.
I was pretty nervous because, Joe's a tough cookie, Jeff, and she didn't put up with any of my crap in Africa. So
fair enough.
I thought, if we got abducted or anything, I was like, I'm going to just sick Joe on them because she'll say.
Hey, I got a good one for you on knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing you don't put it in a fruit salad. I can relate to that one.
Well, is it all right if I borrow that?
You may. I borrowed it from somewhere. I don't know where.
But they're all fun. You take all these things, and I think you guys had Glenn Weinrob on. He's one of my alumni from Inova. I didn't realize at the time, one of the best compliments I ever got was one of my attendings told me, you remind me a lot of Glenn Weinrob. And I was like, well, who's this guy? Right. I mean, I was new in residency, and I just started then he started really coming on the scene with the national scene with lecturing and FACFAS and everything like that. And then I just got to know him better and better over the years. And I realized later on, I was like, well, that was a really high compliment for someone to say that. And so there's just so many great guys that have these sayings. And Glenn has a great saying, which is, good surgical outcomes come from experience, and experience comes from bad surgical outcomes. And, you got all these little sayings you can do. And I just collect them, and I just try to kind of put them on the table for our residents and fellows, give them something to think about, because we want to have fun too. And if you can make something like a tomato a learning point that's light, easy, but effective, that's what we call brilliant.
Well, in the name of fun, maybe we should do some quick questions, Joe, for Doug.
Oh, we can. Or I was also thinking we could save that for the deep thoughts with Doug, because it might make it a little lighten the mood a little bit. We can.
Yeah. All right. That sounds good. So
are these fun questions?
We'll do at least one. We'll do at least one.
Okay. Now you guys have me thinking, like, what am I missing, right? If you ask me something hard, we'll edit it out. And then I'll be better prepared next time.
Okay, well, you'll have this one. I'll start with it. When are the Bears going to make a difference in the NFL?
Well, they made a difference in their franchise. This is the first time in franchise history that they fired a head coach in the middle of the season. Yeah. And the thing about Chicagoans and their sports, particularly the Bears, is, you have Sox fans and Cubs fans, you got hockey fans, but everybody kind of rallies around the Chicago Bears. And I always tell people, if you want 4 different opinions, watch 3 Bears fans argue over why we lost the game. But one thing that we all kind of agree on is we lost a lot of games this year because of the direct actions of our head coach. And it took that kind of abysmal coaching to get someone fired for the first time in franchise history mid-season. I'll be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that question. It's been a long time, and I have a lot of Packer fan people living amongst me and around me and patients, and they do a really good job putting their thumb in. So I'm just kind of biding my time for the next time the Bears go to the Super Bowl. They just have a bad karma about them. I always say Chicago Bears are where quarterbacks go to kill their careers.
There might be some truth to that. Maybe Caleb Williams can change it around for him.
You got to feel sorry for all of them. I mean, so many of them. Jay Cutler was an all-pro quarterback before he came to Chicago. So, it just can't be, and it happens over and over and over again. So there's something about the system, and I think it's partially just maybe getting the right culture in there and getting the right leadership. But
like anything,
it's hard.
Yeah. All right. Well, Doug, we're going to save all the rest of them for our next episode because we're going to do the deep thoughts episode. If you're willing to come back.
I texted, or I'm sorry, I emailed Jo when she asked me if I would do this, and I said pretty much anything for you. So, and Jeff, having a nice talk with you as well, I think equally, it's been a pleasure. I was really not sure what direction this would go, but if you guys see value in it, I'm happy to come have a conversation, because people with philosophy degrees, we talk and we make up words.
Okay. Well, I specifically want to spend more time on entrepreneurship, because every year I see more and more students that are applying to our program that have a business background a little bit, or some engineering, and they're interested in having an impact on the future of medical devices. And I don't know if they know what they're getting into, right? Entrepreneurship is, I always say, it's your ability to assume risk, but I could be wrong on some of that. And I'd love your feedback on that on the next episode.
Sure. No, I love it. I love coaching anybody who will listen to go out and get it for yourself, right? Go out and do it. You can do it. When I lecture, when I talk, even just about surgical stuff, when I'm talking to a crowd of doctors, my goal is never to say, hey, look at all this cool stuff I can do, and look at me. It's you haven't moved the needle as a mentor unless you can tell somebody you can do this too. It's just this is kind of what you got to do to get there. And a lot of times it's just putting the work in, right? So I always tell anybody who will listen, who has an entrepreneurial idea, part of it is you're not going to know everything going in. Just know that you're going to have a lot of surprises when you start to go down that path. But if you have conviction that you want to go down that path and you put the work in, some good things are gonna come out of it. And the ones that don't end well, it's another part of our education. And so there's value in all of it.
Yeah, and another one of those little cliches, it's not win or lose, it's win or learn, right? I mean, kind of one of those things.
Sure.
All right. Well, hey, you fulfilled your father's wishes for you. I congratulate you. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I guess so. And you just get out there and do what you love, and like we said, Jo, but also learn what you love, and learn it well, and then you'll love even more.
Absolutely. Joey, any final thoughts?
No, thank you. I mean, I have lots of thoughts, of course, but thank you so much, Doug. We have taken plenty of your time for today, that we will just schedule some more time, because I would love to dig into some of the happiness stuff and the alignment, that the joy that you can find in this profession. But I fully agree with you. If people are hearing a message of, oh, you work 9 to 5 and you don't have to do that much, but you can still be really successful, that's not the message. That's not the message. So I would love to dig deeper into more of the joy of what we do, and because there's so much negative that's out there, and so many fun things to talk about.
Yeah, totally. And that's you could spend an entire topic on that, on how to avoid that pitfall.
Yes.
Of falling into that trap.
Yeah.
I'd love to. I mean, this has been really fun. Thank you for having me. It's really, I appreciate it. And Jo, I'm glad you thought of me. So
of course. And it's really fun to connect with you on LinkedIn. Actually, that's my last thing, is if people do want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to engage with you?
If they just search my name on LinkedIn, they can hit me up and request to connect, I guess is what it is. I'm pretty liberal about it. I don't really screen it. Just don't connect with me and start blasting me with like the auto whatever. Those get kind of out pretty quick. But yeah, I mean, that I'm happy to do that, and I'm happy to, if anybody thinks that they want to have a conversation or talk about anything, I'm good with that too. So I like being available for anybody who thinks that I can help with anything.
That's wonderful.
Jo, I'll see you in FACFAS. Jeff, will you be there?
Oh, absolutely. It's in Phoenix, our hometown.
Well, you guys have not given me any really hard questions today, so please let me buy you a beer, a drink, a soda, whatever of your choice. I'd love to see you guys in person and say thank you.
Oh, we will set that up for sure. And we're going to send you a fun little cup with our branding so that you can enjoy whatever beverage of choice that you would like in it. It's a very good size. So
5 in the morning, it's black coffee with a stick of butter in it.
I love
there
it.
you go.
All right. Well, to all of our listeners out there, whether you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating. Perhaps leave a couple of comments. And if you're watching on YouTube, by all means, become a subscriber. Joe and I will continue to bring you leaders in our wonderful profession. Doug, thanks again for joining us tonight, and we're looking forward to round 2.
Be well. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in Phoenix.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.